Mercedes did not just lose a race in Barcelona. They may have exposed the weakness that could destroy their entire championship. Kimi Antonelli was 4 laps away from saving Mercedes, running second, protecting massive points, and proving the Silver Arrows still had control. Then the power unit failed. And that one moment changed everything. Because this was not an isolated disaster. It was the second terminal power unit-related failure in just 3 races. It happened right after the Fédération Internationale de l'Automobile introduced a new technical test. It happened while Ferrari were hunting Mercedes down. And worst of all, it happened while Lewis Hamilton, the man Mercedes let go, was winning in red. Now Toto Wolff has a nightmare he cannot spin. His championship leader cannot trust the car. His drivers are already under pressure. His rivals smell blood. And the investigation at Brixworth may decide whether Mercedes are still title favorites, or whether Barcelona was the first sign of a collapse nobody inside that garage can stop. Subscribe to the channel. Barcelona was supposed to be the proof, not the warning. Mercedes arrived with the kind of situation every championship team wants. A fast car. A front-running driver. A teenager leading the title fight. And a circuit where the power unit mattered enough to give them a real chance to control the weekend. On paper, this was where Mercedes should have looked strongest. But Formula One does not expose weakness when everything is calm. It waits until the pressure is highest. It waits until the tires are worn, the temperature is rising, the strategy has already played out, and the points are close enough to touch. Then it asks the only question that matters. Can the car survive? For Kimi Antonelli, the answer in Barcelona was brutal. No. And that is why this story is much bigger than one retirement. Because Antonelli was not crawling around outside the points. He was not having a quiet race that nobody would remember. He was running second. He was carrying Mercedes' biggest result of the afternoon. He was doing exactly what a championship leader is supposed to do when the win is no longer available. Limit the damage. Protect the points. Keep the title fight under control. Then, with just 4 laps left, the power unit failed. That timing is what makes the whole thing feel so dangerous. A failure on the first lap is painful, but clean. Everyone understands it immediately. The race is gone, the damage is done, the team moves into recovery mode. But a failure near the end is different. It lets hope build first. It lets the driver fight, manage, suffer, and believe. It lets the team calculate the points. It lets rivals realize how much they are about to lose. Then it takes everything away. That is the kind of failure that changes the atmosphere inside a garage. And Mercedes already had enough atmosphere to deal with. Before Barcelona, the team was trying to present itself as controlled. But underneath that image, the pressure was building from every direction. George Russell wanted to prove he was still the driver Mercedes could build around. Antonelli wanted to prove he was not just the future, but the present. Toto Wolff wanted both of them fast, but not divided. That is an almost impossible balance. Because 2 fast drivers can be a dream, until both of them believe the same championship belongs to them. Russell had already shown he would not make life easy for Antonelli. In Canada, their battle had become public when Russell defended hard and Antonelli ended up on the grass. Antonelli's radio messages made the frustration obvious. Wolff had to step in and make it clear that those conversations belonged inside the team, not out in the open. That moment matters because it showed Mercedes were not just managing racing. They were managing emotion. And emotion is dangerous in a championship fight. It can make a driver braver. It can also make a driver impatient. It can make a team sharper. It can also make a team defensive. When the car is perfect, emotion can be controlled. But when the car starts failing, emotion starts looking for someone to blame. That is where Antonelli's Barcelona retirement becomes a nightmare for Wolff. Because the young driver did not throw it away. He did not crash. He did not make a reckless move. He was simply stopped by the machine. And for a championship leader, that is the hardest kind of loss to accept. You can study a mistake. You can apologize for a collision. You can learn from a bad start. But when the power unit dies, there is nothing to correct from the cockpit. You are left with anger. And unanswered questions. Mercedes had already suffered another terminal power unit-related failure recently. Barcelona made it 2 in 3 races. That is no longer a tiny detail hiding in a race report. That is a pattern strong enough to disturb an entire team. Toto Wolff understood that immediately. His reaction was not just about Antonelli losing second place. It was about the message that failure sent to everyone else. Ferrari saw it. McLaren saw it. Russell saw it. Antonelli felt it. And Hamilton, driving for Ferrari, took full advantage of it. That is the part that makes Barcelona so painful for Mercedes. Lewis Hamilton did not win in a messy race where everyone fell apart. He won with control. Ferrari made the right strategic call under the virtual safety car, and Hamilton turned it into victory. The former Mercedes icon beat Mercedes while Mercedes were braking. That is the kind of image that stays in people's minds. Hamilton in red, winning. Antonelli in silver, stopped. Wolff watching the championship picture tighten. And underneath all of it, the same terrifying question. What if the fastest version of this Mercedes is also the version that cannot be trusted? That is the question the team now has to face. Because the Barcelona failure did not happen in a vacuum. It came during a period when the Fédération Internationale de l'Automobile had introduced a new hot compression ratio test, and Mercedes were already under scrutiny after rival complaints about a perceived power unit advantage. That does not prove wrongdoing. It does not mean anyone confirmed something intentional. But it does mean every Mercedes power unit problem now lands under a brighter light. A normal failure becomes a headline. A technical weakness becomes a championship threat. A retirement from second place becomes evidence that the team may not fully understand the risk inside its own package. And that is the scariest part. Mercedes do not simply need to be fast anymore. They need to prove the speed can last. Because in Formula 1, the championship is not won by the car that looks strongest for most of the race. It is won by the car that still works when the race is almost over. Barcelona did not give Mercedes that answer. It gave them the opposite. It showed them a car that could run at the front, a driver who could deliver under pressure, and a result that could have protected the championship. Then it showed them how quickly all of it can disappear. And once that kind of doubt enters a team, it does not leave easily. It follows the engineers back to the factory. It follows the drivers into the next briefing. It follows the strategy team into every risk calculation. It follows Toto Wolff into every camera interview, because from now on, one question will sit behind every Mercedes weekend. Are they managing a temporary reliability problem, or is Barcelona the first real sign that their championship weapon has a flaw they cannot hide? But the most dangerous part of this story is not the failure itself. It is the timing around it. Because Mercedes were not operating in a normal technical environment when Antonelli's power unit gave up. They were already being watched. They were already being questioned. And the new technical test from the Fédération Internationale de l'Automobile meant Barcelona was not just another race weekend. It was a spotlight. The source material says the new hot compression ratio test became active from June 1st, and Barcelona was the first real power circuit where that standard mattered. That may sound complicated, but the simple version is this. The governing body had changed how it was checking part of the power unit environment. And rival teams had already been complaining about a perceived Mercedes advantage. That does not mean Mercedes did anything illegal. It does not mean the governing body confirmed Antonelli's failure was suspicious. But it does mean the entire Mercedes package was already surrounded by questions before the race even started. And in Formula 1, questions can become pressure very quickly. At first, the story was about whether Mercedes had found something clever. Something other teams did not fully understand. Something inside the rules, but powerful enough to make rivals uncomfortable. Toto Wolff had already pushed back hard against that kind of talk. He had made it clear he did not understand why other teams were focusing on Mercedes instead of getting their own work together. That is classic Wolff. Direct. Defensive. Confident. A team boss protecting his people and his technology. But Barcelona changed the angle. Because when a team is accused of having a powerful advantage, the worst thing that can happen is not always being proven wrong. Sometimes the worst thing is the advantage breaking. That is where the suspicion shifts. People stop asking only whether the car is fast because of something clever. They start asking whether the car is fragile because of how hard it is being pushed. And that question is far more uncomfortable. Because if Mercedes had simply been slow in Barcelona, the explanation would have been easy. Ferrari were better. Mercedes missed the setup. The tires did not work. The track did not suit them. But that is not what happened. Mercedes had speed. Russell had pole. Antonelli had race pace. The car was strong enough to fight at the front. Then it failed. That creates a completely different kind of fear. It suggests the problem might not be performance. It might be the cost of performance. Think of it like turning your phone brightness all the way up on a hot day, while running every app at once. For a while, it looks amazing. Everything is bright, fast, and responsive. But underneath, the battery is draining, the device is heating, and the system is getting closer to shutting itself down. That is not a perfect comparison, but it gives you the feeling. Mercedes may have a car that can deliver enormous performance. The question now is whether it can deliver that performance safely, repeatedly, under championship pressure. And that is where Antonelli's failure becomes the key moment. Because this was not a test session. This was not a private run. This was not a Friday experiment with low stakes. This was a race where the championship leader was running second with 4 laps remaining. Every point mattered. Every lap mattered. And when the power unit failed, the damage was not theoretical. It was immediate. It changed the race result. It changed the championship pressure. It gave Ferrari exactly the emotional opening they needed. Lewis Hamilton's victory made that even sharper. Because while Mercedes were facing another power unit failure, Ferrari were executing cleanly. Hamilton and Ferrari used the virtual safety car period perfectly. They made the call. They gained the position. They converted the opportunity. That is how championships are built. Not only with raw speed, but with moments where one team is calm enough to strike while another team is dealing with chaos. And Mercedes looked chaotic. Not because everyone was panicking publicly. Because the story around them had too many fires burning at the same time. The power unit fire. The driver rivalry fire. The Ferrari threat. The regulatory attention. The Antonelli pressure. The Russell question. The Hamilton shadow. Any one of those would be difficult. All of them together create a championship storm. And this is why the phrase, "no accident," becomes so powerful, but also so dangerous. Because people hear, "no accident," and immediately think of something intentional. Something hidden. Something being exposed. But the real meaning, based on the source, is different. Antonelli's failure was not confirmed as deliberate. It was not confirmed as sabotage. It was not confirmed as a rule breach. But it also cannot be dismissed as meaningless bad luck anymore. Not after 2 terminal power unit-related failures in 3 races. Not after the new technical test. Not after rival complaints. Not after Wolff admitted Mercedes cannot fight for the title if these failures continue. That is the distinction. No confirmed conspiracy, but a very real pattern. And in Formula One, a pattern can be just as damaging as a scandal. Because a pattern forces teams to react. Mercedes now have to send the failed power unit back to Brixworth. That is not just a location on a map. That is the heart of their power unit operation, the place where engineers will search for the root cause, piece by piece, system by system. They will look for the reason oil pressure was lost. They will study the data. They will check whether the failure was isolated, or whether it points to something deeper. And until they know, Mercedes have a problem that cannot be solved with confidence. That uncertainty spreads. It reaches the race engineers, who may have to think twice about power settings. It reaches the strategy team, who may become more careful about aggressive calls. It reaches the drivers, who now know that even a perfect race can still disappear. And it reaches Wolff, who has to keep the message strong while knowing the truth is not fully clear yet. That is one of the hardest jobs in Formula One leadership. You have to protect confidence without pretending there is no danger. Say too much, and you feed your rivals. Say too little, and your own team feels the fear. Wolff's post-race line showed how little patience he had left. When he said Mercedes cannot compete for a championship if every second race loses major points, he was not just criticizing the failure. He was setting a standard. This cannot happen again. But here is the problem. A team principal can demand reliability. He cannot create it with anger. The answer has to come from the factory. From the data. From the failed components. From the engineering truth that does not care about public relations. And that is what makes the next part of this story so tense. Because if Brixworth finds a simple, isolated issue, Mercedes can breathe again. They can explain it, fix it, and move forward. The championship damage will still hurt, but the fear will shrink.